In this presentation, we will start a new company file within QuickBooks. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. We now have the bank statement from the customer. We've set up a folder for the customer, and we're going to use this bank statement in order to set up a new company file within QuickBooks, within the QuickBooks system. We're going to be using the 2019 version of the software, but we can use prior versions of the software to enter this data as well. First thing we'll do is just open up the software. Typically, we'll do that with an icon on the desktop. So I'm just going to double click on the icon. Again, I'm using QuickBooks 2019, but we can use prior versions of the software. And we are using a desktop version, however, a QuickBooks Pro version versus an online version. So I'm just going to double click on this item, open up the program. If you had a prior company file open, it would open to the prior company file by default. QuickBooks is going to try to help us out, and if we're a company that always works in the same file, that's really useful because in that case, we don't typically double click on the file, but just the program. The program then finds the company file that we were working on. It would be like us double clicking on a Microsoft Word program, and then it opened up the last Word document that we were in. What we're going to do here is close the last file that was open, if one is open, and we'll typically get a screen like this. If this is the first time we're using the software, then these items will be blank. If we had been using the software in the past, then we could have some information in these items for prior areas, prior clients that we have worked with. Note that you don't want to rely on this screen to know where your data is in the system, because if you rely on this screen, it could get wiped out for some reason if we update the program, and we won't know where our data files are if that's the case. So it's very important for us to, as we have multiple clients, make sure that we know where the data files are on the computer and have backup files hopefully in a different location as well to make sure that we're safeguarding ourselves against loss of data and just simply not being able to find the data on the system. We're going to use this information now just to start a new customer file. And what we have so far is just the bank statement. And the bank statement will usually just have at least the name on it. And that's all we really need. So we're just going to start the file really quickly, just provide the name and set up a chart of accounts that we can then use this information to just enter the data into. Then we're going to use this bank statement in order to enter that data. So we're going to try to set this up as quickly as we can. We're going to minimize this, and to do that we could create a new file down here, a new file. I usually use the drop down, so I usually go to the drop down because this, even if we had another file open, we could still go to the file drop down and go to the file tab and say open new company. It'll just close whatever company we're in and then go to the new company here. So we'll go to new company. We have a few different options here. This is obviously the option that they're recommending with the big blue button. So answer some basic questions. We also have some other options here, which would be to open existing file. That's probably not what we're trying to do when we're starting a new file. We can convert a Quicken data. So if that's the case, that's kind of a specialized case, Quicken being another program by QuickBooks. And so it's possible for us, if there's already data outside the system, to do that. If we're doing the bookkeeping in this format, we would probably want to avoid that. If a customer says, hey, I've got information in another system, or even if it's our file and we have information, what we want to do most likely is say, hey, we're going to draw a line right now. If you have questions about the prior detail of the prior data, then you want to go to that system and look at it. What we're going to do is enter that beginning balance data as of now and move forward in the new system, and we'll enter the balances now, but not have the new system kind of being muddied up with all the prior data that could be kind of a mess. What we're going to do is draw a line from here forward, make it clean from this point forward, make everything under the new system going this point forward. That's kind of how our mindset is when we're entering data in this format, in this kind of system, to make it as simplified as possible. Set up on behalf of someone else and advanced setup. Now the advanced setup is going to be something that we may use because there's going to be more questions within the advanced setup. So if that's something that those questions are helpful, we can go through that. I use the quick setup here. We're going to use the quick setup here, and then we can change any preferences we need to within the preferences. The advanced setup, what it typically does is ask some questions within the preferences, more questions, many more questions that would be part of the preferences, eliminating our need to go and then change the preferences after we've set up the file. But we can do it in either way. What we're going to do is do the quick item here, which is just to select this setup item and set up the system as quickly as we can. The minimum information, all we really need for the minimum information is really the name. So we need the name, industry, and the business type. Those are the ones with the red asterisks. Those are the only ones we really need right now. Now, when we first start the business and we set up the file, if all we have is a limited conversation we've had with the customer, and now we have our first documentation, which is basically the first bank statement that we want to use to enter into the data, then that's all we're going to enter right now. We're just going to enter the minimum that we have. We'll take down notes as we go. And typically when we start this process, we probably want to have a Word document or some other notepad open looking something like this, where it's just going to say, here's the name of the company, Get Guitar Lessons and Equipment. Not a very creative name, but that's okay. And we'll say this is going to be the open items, meaning questions we have for the first month that we're going to start this, in our case, January. So we're going to have questions that we're going to put together for this first month of operations. I typically then have a bullet point. We'll enter those questions. So the name is going to be Get Guitar Lessons. I'm going to copy this. And this will typically, you're going to want to save this onto our folders. So I would typically go to File, Save As, and Browse. Put this on our desktop where we had the guitar lessons, our folder that we set up. I'm going to put this in the docs, and we're going to put it in the 2019 and then the January docs. And for now, I'm not going to put it in any other folder here. I'm just going to put it right there. This is guitar lessons, and I'm just going to call it Open Items January 2019. So these are the questions that we're going to put together as we enter this data, so that we can ask the client as it goes and see see if they can clear some things up. So we're going to say save this information. Then I'm just going to copy this. This is going to be the name of the company. And we're going to put this up top. That's going to be the name of the company. Now the industry that we are in, we can select the Help Me Choose item over here. This is going to be important because the machine or QuickBooks will then help us to generate the industry and give us some information based on that, meaning QuickBooks will set up our chart of accounts based on some of the information that we will set up. We're going to allow QuickBooks to do that, to pick our chart of accounts, because that'll give us a guideline. And the way QuickBooks can more customize that is to pick the appropriate industry. Now, most of the time in this type of format, if we're just going to try to enter all the data from the bank statement, use more of a cash basis system, then usually the types of clients we want to pick up are going to be service type clients. We don't really want to deal with inventory because that adds a level of complication that we can't really handle as well with this type of system. In other words, if we want to track inventory, we can't really do it that well by just entering data into the system from the bank account. However, there are some situations that we can think about how can we work around that. And so in this example problem, we'll show those more complex situations. If we're a small bookkeeping firm, however, we want to first try to pick up the service companies, and if we do pick up inventory companies, be very specific about what we do and do not do with relation to inventory. We'll discuss that more as we go. And so for our purposes, we're going to go through here and pick an inventory related client just to be a bit more complex. And you can remove that complexity of inventory by simply not, choosing what type of clients you want to pick up and removing the inventory type clients completely if you so choose. So you can go through these items, other or none, which of course would be good if we don't want QuickBooks to pick an industry type of standards and then create a trial balance from it. So we're going to say here that we want a general product-based business in order to pick up those inventory items. What we want QuickBooks to do is make a chart of accounts which will include some of the types of accounts related to inventory. It'll then include an inventory asset account, and it will include a cost of goods sold. It'll also change the terminology a bit within the system to gear towards more of a company that has inventory, meaning sales or revenue might not be called sales or fees earned. It might be called sales rather than fees earned if we sell inventory, but it's still just revenue or income. So we're going to say okay, and then we have the business type. When we choose the business type, with the type of clients that we want to pick up, probably if we're working in a system where we're just entering the data from the bank statement, are probably mainly going to be sole proprietors or possibly people that started up a single member LLC or maybe a single owner S corporation. Possibly small partnerships might be in this as well, but just be careful when you're dealing with partnerships here. If there's more than one owner, then we're going to have to break out the capital accounts between the two partners. And we may need help in order to break out that capital account between the two partners, and because we want to make sure that that's done well, so the two partners have some idea of how they're going to break that out. So if we're talking about a C corporation, if we talk to our client and they say they're a regular, normal corporation, then it's possible that they're probably a larger type of customer and maybe a little bit more complex. The general rules for any types of these industries is pretty much the same in terms of how we're going to record the expenses and the revenue. However, usually a sole proprietor is going to be smaller and therefore have fewer transactions, which will be easier to track. And if we're talking about partnerships, it could still be a small partnership which we can take on and still run in the similar fashion. We just need to be careful that we have to deal with two capital accounts, or in some fashion those two partners are going to have to break out their portion of the income. So we could talk more about that at a later time, but here we're going to go with a sole proprietor. So it'll be a sole proprietor. Now, what we don't have, the employer identification number, not required for us to move forward, but we might need it. And if it's a sole proprietor, it might be someone that doesn't have an identification number. If they don't have any employees, they may not have it. And even if they don't have any employees, they may still have it. If they don't have an employer identification number, they're probably using their social security number as a reference number to the IRS. So this is something that we might want, so I'm going to go to our open items and type in employer identification number. So this will be one of the questions we ask. So I'm just going to ask that question and say, hey, I set up the file without an employer identification number. If you have one, then we can enter that into the system. Why is it relevant? Well, if we start to make forms, such as if we make 1099 forms out of QuickBooks, then we possibly could need the employer identification number to put on the forms. Or if we have payroll at the end of the year, if we're printing reports from the system, then there are some reports where the employee identification number will be useful. However, if we're just printing reports, financial statements or statements for someone else to help out and prepare at the end of the year, then the employer identification number may not be something we need in the system at all. So it just depends on what we're going to be using this information for. If we go back to this, we're going to say, then we've got the business address. And again, we may have the business address, we may not have the business address. It might be on, obviously, the bank statement. We could see the bank statement address and see if it's there. If we don't have it, if we're not sure of it, we don't need it to move forward. So I'll put that in the open items as well. We can say, hey, the business address, if you give us the business address, we'll put that into the system. Again, when would it be important? Well, it's usually important when we bill the client and make information for outside users for the client. But if we're on a cash-based system, if we're just entering this data for compiling data for the end of the year, tax preparation and whatnot, then we may not need the address at all to get that information. So it's just, again, it depends what we're using it for. And if we're just basically just entering financial data, trying to get reports, then possibly we don't even need the address. So then we have the phone number and whatnot, same kind of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and create the company now. So we're going to create the company. It's going to take a little bit to do so. It is a large file. Remember that QuickBooks can create multiple company files if we're using the desktop version. And that's the point. That's the beauty of if we're doing bookkeeping, or even if we're doing our own books, we can have test files and have multiple files and test things out and see how things work in the desktop version in a way that we can't do in a lot of online versions. And that's going to be one of the benefits we have. We now have our file set up. You'll notice what QuickBooks did not do. It did not ask us where we want to put the company file. It kind of made an assumption there. And sometimes QuickBooks will do that in order to do the quick setup process, and it didn't tell us where do we want to put the file. So what we want to do is make sure that we know where the file is now. There's a couple different ways that we can find the file and move the file to where we want it. One way is you can go to the File tab up top, select the File dropdown, and we want to go to Open the Previous Company. And here's the one we just had here. Now this is called a mapping. This is a mapping of where I put the company file. Sometimes if it's the first file that we set up, it may ask us where to put it. Or if it's, it might put it into a folder called Intuit, which is the owner of QuickBooks. And so we'll have to kind of dig that out and make sure it is there. So in our case, it might also put where the prior restored file was, where we have restored files in the past. And that's what it has done in this case. So what we want to do is make sure we go in and say, okay, where is this? Let's see this side by side if we were to map this out. So I've taken a screenshot of this. Here's the location that we're finding. It's on the C drive. So here's the C drive. If we map this out on a Windows computer, here's the C drive. It's under users. So we're going to say, okay, C drive. Here's users. We're going to double click on that. We're going to say then it's under owner. So I'm going to double click on the owner. And you can see the mapping up top in a similar fashion up here as we see over here. And then we've got the desktop. So here's the desktop. We could have just started there, but here's the desktop. So here's the mapping, same mapping we have up top. And then we're going to go to Get Great Guitars, which is another company file. So we're going to say, okay, Get Great Guitars. So then we have that. And then it's under Restored QuickBooks Files. So we're going to go to Restored QuickBooks Files here. And then it's under Session 1. So I'm going to double click Session 1. And then we have Get Great Guitar Lessons. So these items here are all related to it. So this is where it put it by default. So again, hopefully it'll ask us to where do we want to put it. And if we go to that longer setup process, it'll almost definitely ask us where we want to put it. But if for whatever reason it puts it somewhere where we don't know by default, or if we have some prior files that we don't know exactly where they are at, then we really do want to find them. We can keep working without locating them and always use that open window within the QuickBooks program, but we don't really know where the files are. So it would be better for us to take these, put them where we know where they are. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually close the company file. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to close it, because I want to move these over, and I can't really move them with the company file in use. So I got to close it. I'll just close the entire program right now. And it says, are you sure you want to exit? I'm going to say, yeah, let's exit the program. And by doing that, then we can go to our other files where we want to put it. And I'm going to put these side by side. So here's where it's at. I just double clicked on the desktop to the folder that we have set up under Guitar Lessons and Equipment. And we're going to put this under the QuickBooks data files, not the backup file, but the data file. I'm just going to double click on that. And I want to drag all this over. Now this is the only file we should need. And this is like some other stuff that QuickBooks puts together when it makes the file. But we might as well just move the entire thing. So I'm going to highlight this entire thing by dragging down here, or you can hold down Shift or Control and click on these items, let go of Shift or Control, then left click and drag them where we want them to be. So it says, could not find this item. I'm going to go ahead and skip that item. That's okay. It should be okay. And then we'll double check that that is okay. And now, so now it's in our normal file spot. So I'm going to close these out just to show us this. Close this out, close this out. Here we are on our desktop. What we've done is put this into our normal desktop location. So if I double click on our file here, this is our client file. And then we've got the QuickBooks data file, double clicking on that. And then here's the data file. What I'm going to do now is try to open up the software as we would normally with like a Word document or an Excel document by clicking on the kind of document, or in this case the file, rather than first opening the program. Because this is not a backup file but the actual file, it should then, like an Excel document or Word document, open the program and open up the file with it. So I'm just going to double click on it and see if that is indeed the case. So here it is. Here is the file. The file is located where we want to locate it now. Everything is set up. If we just view quickly the lists up top, and then the chart of accounts, we'll see what QuickBooks has done for us. It's basically, it hasn't given us just a blank file. It's put some information. It's put a list in place, and this list will correlate somewhat to the type of company. And the major difference we're going to have is whether or not we have inventory or not. So this list has cost of goods sold items, which if we had a service company would not. We can now use this list as a kind of guide, especially when we enter that first month of data. It's difficult for entering the first month of data because we're going to have to assign some kind of account. And if we have this account listed, we could say, okay, these are the defaults. If we know that something can fall into the default, we'll use these defaults that QuickBooks has provided. Otherwise, we would have to set up a new account every time we enter a new transaction for the first month of operations. If we want to do that, then we would set up this account with no type of industry, and we can remove the industry type that would be generating this chart of accounts, and then we could have a completely customized chart of accounts, which some people may prefer to do. But if we're not comfortable doing that, then using the chart of accounts is helpful because they give kind of industry standards. So we can say, by default, every time I enter something into QuickBooks, I'm going to see if it falls into this category. If it does, great. Then I'm going to make new accounts only when necessary. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.